As we begin, we pause to acknowledge the place we exist, connect, and create is the traditional unsurrendered territory of the Abenaki people, one of 5 Wabanaki nations who have a continued and enduring presence with this land. Presence with mountains, with vistas, with forests, waters, winds. Presence with people, relations, culture, and creations. Presence with light. In Abenaki, Waban refers to the white flickering light in the sky, and a key is the word for land or the earth. So the Wabanaki are the people of the Dawnland. We acknowledge Abenaki ancestors past, present, and future. And with that, I want to welcome you to this digital access series, creating an action plan, an accessibility action plan. My name is Heidi Swevens. I use she, they pronouns, the Director of Community Partnerships with Inclusive Arts Vermont. And for access purposes, I'll do a visual description of myself and surroundings. I have blue eyes and pale skin with short brown hair. And today I'm wearing a sort of light green sweater. Behind me is an abstract painting, a rectangular painting with different colors against a whitish wall. And just a little background on, one sentence background on this training. Katie and I were doing a deep dive series last summer, I think, with organizations, and we decided in that we needed to like turn everything into actions. And we thought that this would be a great way to wrap up this digital series, to take some things and put it into a plan. So glad you're here. And I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I've shared my screen. This is just our welcome slide here. On the right-hand side, the background is sort of a abstract swirl of pink and purple and blue and teal. And with white text, there's the Inclusive Arts Vermont logo, and then it says Arts Education Training Exhibitions. On the left-hand side, there's a purple background, and it says Using the Magic of the Arts to Make Vermont More Accessible Since 1986. And then it has a headshot of Heidi Swevens, Director of Community Partnerships, and a headshot of myself. And I am the Executive Director. So I'm just going to start off with some notes and stuff to get us through today. Like I said, my name is Katie Miller, and I'm the Executive Director here at Inclusive Arts Vermont. I am a woman in her mid-30s. I use she, her pronouns. I have pale skin, blonde hair, black tortoiseshell-ish glasses on today. I'm wearing a white shirt and I'm seated in my bedroom, which has gray blue walls, and there's a big white dresser behind me. You all have been great so far about putting your introductions in the chat box, but if you want to keep doing that, if you haven't already, that would be great. I'm going to remind you all once again, for the last time in this series, that we are all human beings first, and the rest of it comes after that. So if you need to get up, use the restroom, if you need to be joined by humans, big or small, full disclosure, both of my small humans are home today, so one of them might make an appearance at some point. We welcome you to come as you are, so come as you need to today. We do encourage people to have their video screens on, so that, because our trainings are typically really interactive, but if you're more comfortable having it off, that is fine as well. This session is being recorded right now, and it will be available in about a week or so on Vermont Arts Council's website and YouTube channel. We do ask that if you're not the one speaking, you mute yourself just to keep the sound quality as high as it can be. Great, so this is Heidi. Sorry, Heidi. My coffee has not kicked in today, clearly. The background of this slide is plain white, and it has black text that Heidi's actually going to read right in a row based on our notes, so I'll let Heidi do that.
Yeah, thank you. And if we go out of order by accident, this is a collaborative process. So, and when I read, sometimes it's from memory, so it may not be verbatim, but we're going to go, this is what we're planning to do today. The overview for today is first, we're going to talk about accessibility plans. We're going to define and then go into some context and background. Following that, we're going to talk about organizational variables and considerations. Sort of food for thought for you to be able to personalize it to your organizations. for your independent artistry. And then lastly, we're going to practice action planning and kind of go through an example and then give you a chance to think about putting this into a plan and into practice. And then there'll be time for reflection and questions. And then Katie, next slide.
Great. So the next slide is a white background. And on the left-hand side, there's a cover for the Design for Accessibility, a Cultural Administrator's Handbook. And I'm going to explain to you what that is in a moment if you've never seen this before. And that cover has a yellow background, and then there's an illustration in the center that resembles a door at the end of a hallway, and the hallway is green and blue, and the ceiling's blue, and the floor is white. And on the right-hand side, there's black text that reads definitions and context, access plan, accessibility, 504 plan, and other types of plans where access can and should be included. Okay, so first let's define what an accessibility plan is and what we mean when we talk about that. I think an accessibility plan can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For our purposes today, when we talk about access plan, we're talking about a document that is created to take steps towards improving the accessibility of your organization's programs, structures, physical building, whatever that may be. And when we talk about accessibility, I know that accessibility can be sort of a broad term and means, again, a lot of things to a lot of people. When we talk about accessibility today, we're talking about specifically accessibility for people with disabilities. A 504 plan, can I just get like a thumbs up or a heads nod or like a yes or no in the chat? Have you heard of a 504 plan before? Or do you know if your organization or business has one? Let's see, we got a couple thumbs ups that we know what a 504 plan is. Okay, great. It's sort of a mix of people that are familiar and not familiar. So a 504 plan is a formal plan. It's a formal document that organizations develop to give people with disabilities the support and access they need. And in a major way, these plans prevent discrimination and protect the rights of people with disabilities. The National Endowment for the Arts, I'm going to share a link with you. When I'm done talking, I will share all these links. It's hard for me. I can do a lot of things, but I think pulling up my browser and copy and pasting might be where I draw the line. The National Endowment for the Arts has a 504 plan workbook to guide you through the process, as well as this Culture Administrator's Handbook. Those two things combined, I have found to be a very comprehensive look at the accessibility within your organization. The 504 workbook focuses on, I don't know if it's entirely, Heidi might know the answer to this, but it focuses almost entirely on physical access. And the Cultural Administrator's Handbook gets into the nitty-gritty of things like how high to hang pieces. Like if you've been to an inclusive arts exhibition, you might notice that we hang the pieces a little bit lower than the standard hanging height. And the reason for that is accessibility. It gets into the width of your pathways, how tall a pedestal should be. It gets into all sorts of different things that the 504 plan might not address, which is why we recommend using those two things in tandem. I will give you a warning that both of those documents are very large. When you open them up, you're going to be like, wow, this is a lot of pages. It's going to feel like a lot to do, but the 504 workbook starts as just a survey, an audit of where you're at right now without needing to take action on every single little item. And at the end of today, we're going to give you a document that will help you prioritize where to start. Okay, so 504 plan. Some federal funding requires you to have a 504 plan. All federal funding will require you to be working on accessibility in some way and to have accessible programs. So federal funding is tied to accessibility at its core. Lastly, I just want to talk really quickly about other types of plans that exist that aren't a formal 504 plan, but can help improve the access. And it's really places where accessibility should be included if you're thinking about accessibility on a broad level, not just of the participants to your programs or your organization, but your workplace culture or anything like that. So things like that could be strategic plan. Accessibility is a great thing to have in your strategic plan so that you have it and you're looking at it. If you're looking at your strategic plan regularly, like this is a goal we're working towards actively. And I recommend that people put it in every strategic plan, because accessibility isn't one of those things where you check it off and it's done, right? It's a perpetual sort of ongoing thing. Another is job descriptions. To put in there, your organization's values on accessibility. Also, when you do hiring, actually, we have some hiring documentation or postings out there right now. You can go to our website. There's a job posting up, and we say right in the job description and in the posting itself that if you need accommodations for completing the application itself or the job application process, let us know. And we also make it clear that as an organization, we value accessibility and will make accommodations for any employee as it's needed. Lastly, before we move on to the next thing, I do want to say that we at Inclusive Arts Vermont get a lot of questions about doing access audits, like physical access audits, and coming to spaces and asking about physical accessibility. We do not consider ourselves the experts in the state on physical accessibility. The Vermont Center for Independent Living is. And I always highly recommend people contact them if you're looking for an audit or you have questions related to physical access, to contact VCIL or the New England ADA. Now, I'm going to break and let Heidi take it over, and I'm going to share some links with you in the chat for the 504 workbook, the Cultural Administrators Handbook, VCIL, and the New England ADA.
Thanks, Katie. Okay. And before you do that, when you change the slide, do you mind doing the verbal description of the slide?
Absolutely, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so this slide has a white background and black text again. On the left-hand side, there's a photograph of a person sitting in a wheelchair wearing a yellow top. And the person is seated at a wheelchair and they have their hand up sort of waving at a laptop they're facing, and they have headphones in. And the setting that they're in is sort of, it's like an industrial modern sort of architecture, lots of concrete and brick. And on the right-hand side, there's black text that reads variables and considerations. And there's a list of questions in order. The first one is, what work has already been done to build upon? What is organizational structure? Who makes decisions? Who needs to be involved in access planning and the plan? Is there an ADA or 504 coordinator? And everyone is at a different point in the process.
Great. Thank you, Katie. I think that's helpful for the accuracy of the specific slide. And I'm going to just take some time now and go into a little bit more detail about each of those bullet points. Starting with the first one, when we think about accessibility, as Katie mentioned, it is an ongoing kind of never done, and that doesn't need to be a challenge. It can be part of the wonder of accessibility and things changing. Like 3 years ago, would we have ever imagined the importance of digital accessibility in the landscape of arts and culture? Maybe not to the extent that we do today, based on the last couple of years. So, and instead of trying to, instead of being overwhelmed by all that there might be to do, sometimes we say between now and ideal. Between now and ideal, what's possible? And I think a really important starting place is to ask the question of what work has already been done or what is already being done within your organization or within yourself. And I think that sort of strengths-based, assets-based inventory or, brainstorming or just kind of pondering can be a really important place to start when you're looking at where do you want to go with accessibility and all of the checklists and spreadsheets and work plans and things like that, what's already being done. And Katie, are you at a place where you can read people's hands raised and stuff? Because I want to ask a question, but I also know that you might be.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm curious if there's anybody in the Zoom space right now that wants to share something that your organization or you are already doing in terms of accessibility. And we don't always invite questions in at this point, but I'm going to just take a chance and see if there's anybody there who wants to sort of name, a sentence or a couple words about what access things you're working on in your organizations. And you can raise your hand or put it in the chat box.
Heidi, can you share the prompt one more time and I can put that in the chat box for folks?
Yeah, sort of one thing that your organization or you are already doing to work on accessibility for people with disabilities. And
okay, Derek says captions and audio descriptions for our YouTube videos.
Great. I was going to say, this isn't a test. I realize it's after might be a long weekend for people on a random Tuesday morning, but just it's a curiosity more than anything. And maybe some of what you're doing will give other organizations and other people ideas about what they're already doing as well, as a starting place to build upon. I'll give it a couple more seconds and then, you know, continue to sprinkle in things if you think of them. All right, well, I will add that everybody here is getting information, learning about access, and I think that that's an important piece too. So thanks for that. Anything else from the chat box, Katie, before I go?
Yep, there's a couple more. Sarah says, we are working on making our website and materials accessible on all devices and dark mode friendly. And Elena says, we're working on adding high quality alt text to all images on our website.
Thank you. So even within that, we've heard about captionings on video, captions on videos, alt text, which is an access feature for blind people who have blindness or low vision, and other things. And then the other one I'm forgetting right now, but it'll come back to me. Or maybe not. So all those things are digital access features and you're working on them. And so I just want to say yay and thank you. And when we think about, you know, sometimes it can feel overwhelming to think about all the things that need to change. And these are some things that already are changing. And I just wanted to pause and give a shout out to that. So when you're taking this conversation and working on accessibility within your organizations, I think you can start with what things are already happening and what you're already doing. And then you want to think about what is your organizational structure. And what I mean by that, or what we mean by that, is where are decisions made? And, you know, that might not be the decisions about what snacks to get at the art event, or, you know, where to, some of our art classes, it's like, which materials do you want to use? But really, who are making the decisions on all different levels? And then from there, who needs to be involved in a conversation about accessibility? And who is involved and who might need to be, you know, brought to the table. So those are very open-ended questions, and I think they're different to each organization. At Inclusive Arts Vermont, we have 5 people on our management team and 6 or 7 people on our board of directors and teaching artists and participants in groups. So depending on where you want to go, you know, who is involved in decisions. At Inclusive Arts Vermont, there's a couple different layers. Other organizations, like if you work for the state of Vermont, are much larger. Some of them, arts nonprofits in Vermont, it might be 1 person or 2 people. So really, who makes the decisions? And then is there anybody else that needs to be involved in the conversation or the decision-making around access? That might be a resource, it might be, you know, people with disabilities, it might be people in the community, but just things to think about. Who isn't at the table that needs to be there as part of the decisions? And is there an access or 504 coordinator, an ADA or 504 coordinator? Some organizations have that as a designated role. Between now and ideal, I'd like to say in ideal, everybody would have access as part of their role, but we may not be there yet. So just continue to have the conversation with people in lots of different ways. Next on the considerations is recognize that people in your organization, whether that's staff or volunteers, participants, board members, and we've talked about this throughout the series, but understanding disability awareness and access is an ongoing journey, and people are at different points in their understanding or their experience. And I say that without judgment. You know, like, we don't know what we don't know until maybe we have a mistake or we have an awkward moment or we have a really celebratory thing. So I think it's really important to just acknowledge that when you're talking about making accessibility plans and changes, that there's humans involved, and humans are at different places in different moments. And just to recognize that, hopefully, you know, with the intent of learning and growing towards more inclusion, and also taking their experience and, you know, applying it to shared shared goals. But just, you know, yeah, that sort of open human perspective can be really helpful when talking about challenging things. And sometimes disability discrimination, we get legal words in there and it can get staticky just by the nature of that sort of context. And that, yeah, people have different experiences with that. The last thing is, and Katie, this is the next slide. If we want to highlight some things from the article about, with 5 things nonprofits can do. So Katie, do you mind describing this slide?
Yeah, sure. So this slide is a white background, and with black text, it says 5 actions you can take. On the right-hand side, it says, educate yourself, become a more mindful, inclusive employer, make your communications more accessible, identify opportunities for collaboration with the disability movement, rethink your definition of justice, and then underneath that, it says 5 actions nonprofits can take to embrace disability rights and access, Katherine Hyde Townsend. And on the left-hand side, there is an image of a group of 4 people. 3 are seated and 1 is behind them, and they all sort of either have their hands or their fists up. It's like they've been photographed mid saying like, yeah, and they're all looking at a computer together. And I chose this because I think this is the way you're all gonna feel once you have a plan for accessibility.
Thank you, Katie. I love the inflection with it. Yeah, I've got my hands up now. Yeah. We found this article when we were doing a different series, and I think it's still relevant. Like, you know, what can you do, right? Because there's so many entry points into change. And so I don't need to repeat all of these, but I think education, inclusive employment, the more accessible communications in the archives with the Vermont Arts Council series. There's archives about social media and design and, you know, readability, some little things that go a long way for just increasing that access. You know, connecting with other disability or other social justice organizations. And then the one at the bottom about rethink your definition of social justice, I think that comes in around, you know, disability being an experience in many different communities. And so we're not talking about, well, I'm going to say that differently. Rebecca Coakley, who's a disability advocate activist, says, you know, 1 in 3 households has a person with a disability. So if that's not your household, it's your neighbor to the left or your neighbor to the right. So disability justice really is part of social justice. And those words can sound all, you know, activism and advocacy, but I really think that depending on what your organization's mission and values are, and arts and culture organizations sometimes have that place within society of being people to look to make change and be at the forefront of change making. So it's just one thing to consider in very, you know, practical ways that, you know, disability access can be part of what your arts and culture organizations are involved with. And one action step, you know, very simple but big, is the access symbol that Katie and I often say, you know, if you do nothing else, you know, do this one thing with, you know, for accommodation requests, please contact, you know, and a name and multiple ways of communicating, usually a phone number and an email address. If there's a deadline or a timeline, that can be super helpful too. But just that one action really does communicate and you know, meet people halfway, take off some of the emotional labor, as we say. So I'm going to pause there. And I think it's probably a good time for some questions before we get into the action planning. I've got my hands raised. But are there any questions about what Katie and I have covered so far? And Katie, actually, also, do you have anything else to add at this point?
The only thing I have to add is that I did just put a link to the question mark tip sheet in the chat box as well.
Any questions?
Looks like no.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to unshare my screen. There we go. Okay. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to, I did email this morning, but I'm going to put links to download them in the chat box as well, if that works for you. Right now, we're going to give you all a chance to practice. So I'm going to bring up a copy of an action planning sheet that we have put together for you. By all means, in the future, you don't have to use this. It's meant as a tool for a starting place, but a lot of folks have reported to us that they continue to find it helpful if they're revisiting. Really, it's meant as a conversation starter, a way to get the conversation going and thinking critically about where to start. Because if you remember, way back in the beginning of this series, I shared, and it's so true, that the most asked question I think we get is, where do we start? How do you know what to prioritize when funds are limited, time is limited, capacity is limited, all of those things? So this is going to help you do that. I am going to pull up a copy of this worksheet that's all filled out so you can see what it looks like. And then I'm going to share my screen. Full disclosure, I can hear a grumpy child coming up the stairs, so hopefully we make it to your work time. I can help her. Okay. There it is. Sorry, my share screen option disappeared on me. Okay, so this is the action planning worksheet. We're going to give you a blank copy of this. And what this does is it leads you through the process of identifying where to start step by step. So the first one is to compare your organization's policies to that article Heidi was just talking about. I'll make sure there's a link to that in the chat box as well. And there is a link in the document you're going to download, so you should be able to get to it from there. This is filled out just as like a generic organization. It's not filled out for anybody in particular. After that, it says list one ableist practice or policy within your organization below. They decided that their organization's website wasn't accessible, and that's what they wanted to focus on. And then next, identifying what makes it ableist. And it goes through that there. I can hear the crying child. I'm so sorry. It's the times, right? And then the next question is, what are the action steps you can take to change this policy and support inclusion and accessibility? For resources and ideas, check out our website. This links to our resources page, which is broken down by topic. So there's marketing, there's program delivery, just general access stuff. And from there, it breaks it into the action steps of what can you do right now, what can you do in the 6 months, and what can you do in the next year. And the reason we break it down is because this helps you look at it as small, actionable steps that can build on each other and snowball until you can get to the bigger stuff. So if you're going to redo your website, the first step might be researching what is included or what's needed in an accessible website. It might be doing things that are low cost or no cost, low hanging fruit, like adding alt text to all new images on the website, wherein a 6 month goal might be to go back and retroactively add it to all of the images on your website that are already there. And then in the next year, looking at adding new ticketing software and a new accessibility widget and sort of overhauling the design of the website itself. So does that make sense to people how it's structured? Can I get a thumbs up or a yes or a no? That it's structured by starting with smaller tasks and then building out from there? Great, some head nods and thumbs ups. I love it. Okay, so I am going to share with you all the links you need. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to pause the recording and we're going to give you, we'll start with 10 minutes and see how you do. Heidi and I are here to answer any questions. If you have them, feel free to pop in. We're not going to disappear or anything. So we're going to give you 10 minutes until 10:15 to work through this document on your own and start to think critically about what next steps might be for you as either a teaching artist or an organization. On the version we're going to give you, there's also a section for who needs to be part of this conversation that's not at the table right now. So you might be here as you from your organization, but you know that you also need your director and your development folks and your program folks. Like, you need more people at the table. So it's going to help you identify those as well. Any questions before we get started? No? Okay. Oh, Heidi, go ahead.
I just wanted to sort of have another entry point. If instead of researching that article, you want to just start with a policy or practice that you already know, feel free to enter from your own lived experience from your organization. And then also, just in case that word ableist practice feels a little prickly, at this point in the series, we've talked about ableism inherent from society, but I just invite you to think about that sort of as non-judgmentally as possible, just as a way to get to more access and inclusion, that we try to ordinary up disability and just sort of naming ableism as part of that. So in case anybody's having a pause with that, I just wanted to add it in. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, of course. So you have 10 minutes until 10:15. I have sent those files that you need in the chat box. They were also sent by email this morning. If for some reason you don't have them, please reach out to me. I can make sure you get them. And when we come back in 10 minutes, just come prepared to share maybe an action item or how the process was for you. Oh my goodness, now my cat is here too. It's a full house this morning. All right, we're gonna give you guys time to work on that. And like Heidi said, we're here if you have any questions.
Yeah.
It says you're recording.
Oh, it's on my end. I paused it during that break so that there wasn't a 10-minute gap. But anyway, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think inserting accessibility into the strategic plan is great. I think especially if you're one of those organizations where you're reviewing your strategic plan and really working towards those goals regularly. I mean, as much as anybody does. But I think also, you know, when you were mentioning exhibitions, the Cultural Administrators Handbook link could be really helpful because it goes into like all the little itty bitty pieces of, yes, font size, but you know, like I said before, pedestal height and like pathways around said pedestal, like all that kind of stuff that could be potentially really helpful for your organization. Sarah says in the chat, working on making materials and trainings to be more accessible, also adding accessibility to our strategic plan and operations manual. Love it. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, and this is Heidi. I want to just share a story with regard to the exhibitions and kind of accessibility within exhibitions. We had in our past exhibition, and I wasn't involved in this, so it's going to definitely sound like a second-hand story, but the height, somebody from the museum or the gallery setting kind of came over and said, oh, those are so low. So it was really an educational opportunity that some of the accessibility standards and practices that are designed for accessibility of you know, people either who use wheelchairs or who are different heights is maybe not the sort of, I'm putting this in air quotes, norm. So that kind of learning might require in different contexts some other education. And in that opportunity, it was a great example and an opportunity and part of why Inclusive Arts Vermont does the exhibitions, in addition to celebrating the art of people with disabilities, but also to just be in different community spaces and having those conversations as part of just showing up and doing it. So, you know, it's kind of like anything that's a little different, we're not so sure about at first. I mean, I say this is a huge generalization, but change and difference can, you know, just take some time and some education to happen smoothly.
Yeah, and I touched on this a little bit, but I think it's worth noting that when you're starting out this work, it can feel like, especially after you complete the 504 workbook or something like that, it can feel really overwhelming. It can feel like there's a lot to do. And I typically recommend to people start with one thing that feels doable now. And once that feels normal, add something else and something else and something else. And I'm not saying that to pile onto your plate, but eventually, you know, I think part of it is the, like Heidi was saying, the learning how to do it and learning what you don't know yet. Like that part alone is a huge step. So start small, start with things that feel doable and manageable. Elena says, working on leveraging resources both within and outside our organization to figure out how to effectively fund accommodation requests and integrating language and symbols that communicate that accommodation requests can be made. Yeah.
Great.
Great.
This is Heidi. I'm curious if anybody, in addition to sort of action steps that you're going to take, if there's any reflections about what that process was like for you, or what is it to think, we had this sort of, there's lots of places where there's a little more that could be better here or a lot better there, or, sort of did sitting and thinking about this, what did that prompt for anybody, the process itself, if you want to share about that?
I do want to share one more thing from the chat really quick. This is Katie. Kiana, I hope I'm saying your name right. If I'm not, please correct me. Says, I work on the video team at Vermont Public Radio, Vermont PBS, or Vermont Public, excuse me. Vermont PBS and Vermont Public Radio. We've been struggling to have better live captions on our broadcast content that are accurate. I often have to type the captions myself in post-production, but I do not feel as though I'm doing an adequate job. I brought up trying to hire someone who's trained in sign language for our live events and closed captions. There is a Vermont-based company that does captioning that we've not personally used, but a lot of folks have recommended, and they're called White Coat Captioning. I can put a link in the chat box. And this cat. I feel like all through this training series, my animals and children have been okay, but today. So I'll add White Coat captioning to the chat box. And then in terms of typing the captions in yourself, I think that's something also that the White Coat captioning folks can do. I know they can do live or post-production captions. And bringing on ASL for live events on video, Heidi, I wonder if you want to share the story about, or an abbreviated, like anonymous version of the story where we had ASL in a live event, and just making sure everybody's on the same page about that.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add in the captioning, the live captioning and post captioning. There's a number of companies now who are doing that because I think collectively with pandemic times, that accessibility feature, there's just a market for it in a different way. So they're not all on our website and they're not all Vermont based, but we were working with a partner who gave us a list from the Mass Cultural Organization. Katie, I don't know the best way to get that to you, but anyway, just there's more because there's a market for it now. And that means there's an expense. I think that the skill set of trying to do the captions for oneself is not a skill set that everybody has or feels comfortable with. It's a matter of, it might be able to be done, but is it efficient and effective and comfortable for somebody? And that may not be true. And I'm not speaking to your situation or trying to, but just in general, because that access feature is more common and more requested and more expected, there's companies that do it. With regard to the ASL, digital platforms are all so different. So I know we've done the digital, doing accessible digital Zoom events. I'll try to do the short version. There's a difference between pinning and spotlighting. There's a difference between an access request from a presenter and an access request for the audience. And so when Katie and I have talked about, the stuff before the event, during the event, and after the event, before the event, there might be that learning curve of how do I spotlight, how do I pin, what is the expectation of where the ASL interpreter's video screen will be shared so that the audience can have it. And that it seems kind of straightforward, except until you get into it, it's technological and it may not be as straightforward. So I think it's always helpful to do a little research and then ask the ASL interpreters. There's, people who've learned through the squirming of things not happening perfectly, can give some advice. And I think that having ASL interpretation, another sort of takeaway from an event recently is that ASL and captioning are not the same language. So they're not the same access feature, even though they might seem to be for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, like just read the captions. That's not true. It's not the same language and not considered the same access feature. And the phrase communication equity was one that I heard recently, and I thought that that was interesting. So if there's going to be an access feature of ASL, for example, anything that is spoken aloud needs to be translated into ASL. I hope that was the short version, Katie.
No, that's great.
I think inclusive arts, we're in this too, learning as we go. There's lots of things we do have experience with, and we're learning all the time. And then just when we learn something, it changes, right? Somebody decides that it's an intuitive way to change the screen or flip the flop, and we're always learning.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions or reflections before we wrap up for today? No? Okay. Well, just like all the other trainings, we will be here for open office hours next Tuesday. Highly recommend people come if you have any questions that you've got on your mind related to this or any other topic on accessibility. It'll be our last office hours of this series. So just because that's the case doesn't mean we go away, though. Heidi and I are always here. If you need anything, please feel free to reach out by email or phone, and we're happy to help with any of your accessibility questions and needs. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be sending out a link to the office hours next week, along with a survey, and all the links we shared today will be in that email as well. So we'll talk to you soon, and thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.